Hey guys, tonight we step behind the silk curtains of a court so opulent, even its shadows smell like sandalwood. You're entering a world where pearls are currency, mirrors are trained to lie, and princesses are expected to vanish without protests. Of course, this isn't your average ghost story. It's slower, sadder, and soaked in rosewater. You're going to walk marble corridors that never echo. You're going to meet a princess who was too clever, too loved, and far too inconvenient for the men who wore the crown, and eventually, you'll learn why some people say she never really left her chamber. You probably won't survive this court knot because of poison or blades, though those are on standby, but because truth, here, is always the most dangerous thing in the room. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, what city, what time, what mood. I read every single one. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The evening smells like crushed jasmine. Somewhere, a Veena plucks out a slow, almost hesitant melody. Servants move through the shadows barefoot, their silk trousers whispering like leaves in a storm. The princess is not yet known by the court poets or the historians. She's just a baby, swaddled in red silk. Her name inked onto a tiny square of gold leaf that's folded into the emperor's sleeve. You hear her before you see her. That first wail, shrill and royal, cuts through the perfume-thick dusk. Outside, cannon fire signals the birth of another daughter, not a son. The emperor doesn't frown, but he doesn't smile either. Born into a court where every breath is measured. Your princess grows surrounded by softness, embroidered ceilings, rose-petal baths, hand-fed mangoes, and lullabies sung in 6 dialects. But beyond her silk cradle is the Zenanatha harem. The women's quarterwear power is not spoken of, only shifted quietly like cushions before a guest arrives. Here's your first official fact. The Mughal harem wasn't simply a pleasure palace, it was a political maze. Home to thousands of women, from royal wives to concubines, to fiercely ambitious matriarchs, who could, with the right rumor, rearrange the future of an empire. Your princess learns to watch before she walks. Eyes peer through latticed windows, catching glimpses of generals and astrologers. She's not allowed outside the harem, but the world somehow filters in anyway. And here's your first strange detail. For her 3rd birthday, she's gifted a parrot that only repeats things whispered. In Persian, no one taught it, it just listened. She names it Marvish Starlight. It becomes her only friend, besides the silent servant girl who always lingers too long by locked doors. By the time she's 5, your princess speaks 3 languages, and can recite the daily court schedule by heart. By 7, she can predict when the emperor will be in a generous mood. By 9, she knows which concubine should not drink from which goblet. And this is where the soft dread begins. You see, Mughal daughters, especially ones this perceptive, are both cherished and feared. Too clever, and they start to attract attention. The wrong kind. She's told to smile more gently, speak more softly, laugh more rarely. There's a debate among Mughal historians about girls like her. Some say the court celebrated precocious daughters, parading them as proof of divine favor. Others argue that daughters who read too much were quietly married off or relocated for harmony. Either way, the princess starts noticing gaps in conversations when adults fall suddenly silent as she enters. She begins to ask questions with her eyes instead of her voice. And one night, she hears a word she isn't meant to know. Cough, fear. It's whispered by one of the palace midwives. As she's folding linens by lamplight, you hear it too, from behind a carved screen. The woman speaks of a dream of a girl, locked behind marble, whose voice echoes louder after death than it ever did in life. And just like that, something changes in the princess's gaze. It hardens, slightly. Not with anger, with knowledge, as though she's already sensed the shape of her future. And it looks a lot like a sealed room. You follow her back to her sleeping chamber. She passes the fountain shaped like a lotus. She brushes her hand against the cold wall beside the mirrored door. She doesn't cry, she just whispers to the parrot. Don't forget my name. You stand beneath a silk awning, shaded from the brutal Indian sun, though the light still manages to bleed through the fine fabric like diluted saffron. Before you, the Mughal garden stretches in perfect quadrants. Symmetry enforced by dynasty, beauty bound in geometry. But in the stillness, you realize it's not made for play. It's made for watching. The princess is 10 now. Old enough to be graceful, too young to be feared, or so they think. She walks carefully through the manicured lanes, her anklets muffled. With thin strips of cloth, her veil is sheer, but only just. It's the kind of transparency that makes you think you're allowed to look, just not for too long. Around her, eunuchs stand like carved pillars, pretending to admire the flower beds. They're not here for her protection. They're here for containment. This garden, for all its roses and fountains, is a cage with a jasmine-scented leash. Still, the princess walks like she owns it. You trail behind her in spirit, listening as her parrot chirps from a cage wrapped in blue gauze. It no longer speaks Persian. Now it mimics courtly Urdu and whispers fragments of poetry, some of which haven't been written yet, and then you hear it. Two ladies in waiting whispering just a little too loudly, just a little too close. Something about the prince, not her brother. The other one. The one who isn't supposed to be here today. She turns slightly, enough to let the words pass through her like wind through silk. You can feel her calculating it, this new piece of information, this unexpected presence in the Mughal court. Nothing is ever truly a coincidence. A prince in a garden is a question. A risk. Just she drifts closer to the reflecting pool, pretending to trace its edge with her toe. But what she's really doing is watching the angles, mirrors, surfaces, lattice, looking for the spot where her gaze might meet his. She finds it. There, in the bronze trim of a ceremonial urn, his face flickers for just a moment. He looks, she doesn't. That's the game. Here's your historical detail. Mughal princesses were forbidden from marrying. Outside of dynastic convenience, romantic alliances were discouraged. But curiosity, that was harder to ban. There are accounts rare, always fragmented women who dared to look too long at someone not chosen for them. Most were married off early. Others simply vanished into the palace's southern wings. The sections with no windows. You watch her fingers twitch slightly. She's memorizing him. Not because she loves him, because she needs to understand him. This is the age where she starts noticing how people move when they lie. The next day, the prince leaves. The garden is cleared, and one of the lattice screens is replaced. Even though no damage is reported, that's when it starts. She finds petals in her sandals, blackened ones, folded like they've been burned before, being tucked inside her slippers. A teacup arrives with no attendant. Her cushion is moved half an inch from its usual spot. Nothing loud. Nothing direct. Just a growing string of silent warnings. She tells no one. Instead, she begins writing tiny notes in miniature script, tucked behind loose bricks in the women's bathing chamber. Each one scented with rose oil. Each one addressed to the night breeze. Here's your strange detail. Some of these notes were allegedly discovered centuries later. Preserved in the cracks of the marble walls during restoration work, they spoke of dreams she couldn't wake from, of footsteps outside her door that didn't match anyone she knew, and of a voice that began answering her in the margins. There's a debate, of course. Scholars argue whether the notes are authentic or clever forgeries by bored 19th century Some even believe they were coded messages for rebel factions within the court, proof that the princess was involved in a plot. But others believe the more chilling theory, that the voice answering her wasn't political at all. It was already inside the walls. Tonight, as she lays her head on the cold marble pillow, she insists on using too stubborn for comfort, too clever for sleep. You hear her whisper, "Don't let them silence the floor when they walk. You don't understand it, not yet. But the tiles will shift eventually, and when they do, they won't echo." The moonlight is sharp tonight, slicing through the carved yali screen like a blade across skin. You can almost hear it hum, a cold whisper that barely touches the warm marble floor. The princess is 13 now, and in the stillness of her chamber, she listens more than she sleeps. The garden. Once her court of whispers and careful glances, is off limits now. Her visits are paused, the eunuchs say. Repairs, they claim. Security concerns, political tension, all phrases that mean, someone's watching you too closely, or maybe, you're watching them too well. You sit beside her in the dark, as she traces her fingers along the wall. She counts the tiny indentations where the artisans carved floral arabesques into stone, counting as though something important is buried between the petals. The parrot has grown quiet, not silent, just hesitant. It still mutters poetry, but, lately, its favorite phrase is the same line over and over. She never asked to open the door. It's not something the princess taught it. No one did. You begin to notice things in her chamber. A mirror that has been shifted a few inches toward the corner. A small brass tray placed precisely over a crack in the floor. A scroll tucked beneath. A cushion that looks too old for her handwriting and too recent for the history it tells. And now, tonight, she hears the footsteps again. Not outside her door. Inside her wall, just one soft drag of a heel, then silence, then to faint knocks, slow, deliberate, as though echoing from behind layers of silk and mortar. She doesn't scream. She doesn't call for the guards. She simply rises, wraps her shawl tighter, and whispers, I know. She doesn't say who she knows. Or what. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mughal palaces were architectural marvels, filled with secret corridors, servant tunnels, acoustic tricks, and whispering galleries. In some wings, you could hear a sigh spoken 30 feet away. In others, a chamber might absorb sound entirely, muffling cries, arguments, or the final breaths of inconvenient guests. Scholars have long debated whether certain wings of the harem had false walls, partitions added not for design, but for containment, not just of voices, of people. Theories swirl like dust through royal archives. One describes a harem chamber that required no guards because its windows didn't open and its door only locked from the outside. No keys were recorded. Just instructions, passed orally among a very small, very cautious priesthood. And here's your fringe detail. A British surveyor in the late 1800s noted a faint but distinct scent of perfume coming from a sealed chamber in a Mughal ruin near Delhi, there being no apparent access, no ventilation, and no records of it ever being used. The scent was sandalwood. The kind favored by imperial daughters. Back in her chamber, your princess begins writing again. This time, not to the night breeze. Now the notes are addressed to the one who taps. She leaves them tucked behind a chipped marble tile. Just beside her prayer niche, they're not poems anymore, they're questions. What's it like without a name? Did you choose silence, or did it choose you? Are you still dreaming, or is this the dream? She never receives a reply, not in writing, but some mornings, she finds the notes moved, or smoothed flat. Once, folded into the shape of a crane, and always, the parrot stirs just before dawn, blinking twice and muttering, walls remember better than people. There's a new servant girl in the chamber now, quiet, slight limp, smells faintly of mint, and something older like manuscripts left too close to incense. The princess doesn't ask her name, doesn't need to. She recognizes her by her silence. She's the one who doesn't look at mirrors. One evening, while combing the princess's hair, the girl leans in and says, barely above breath, they say she was the emperor's favorite. Too beloved to be married, too dangerous to be free. Then she presses a small shard of mirror into the princess's hand and adds, look only when it rains. She never repeats herself, never explains. And just like that, she's gone. The next morning, a different girl appears. This one, too cheerful, too clean. She says she's always been there. The princess doesn't argue. But that night it rains. You watch her crouch near the carved window, holding the mirror shard under the downpour slick light. The reflection trembles, then stills down just for a moment. She sees another face in the glass. Not hers. Older, familiar, crying without tears. The parrot flutters once, then says, The scent of rain still lingers the next morning. But the skies are now dry, washed pale and too quiet, like the world's been scrubbed just enough to unsettle you. Your princess doesn't speak of the mirror. She places it carefully into a lacquered box and locks it with a thin string of pearls, as though the pearls might keep out what marble and silence cannot. She is 15 now, that age when royal daughters begin to vanish from public record, not vanish in death. That would be too honest. They vanish the way books vanish, by being unwritten. She still walks the inner chambers of the palace, but only with escorts now. Her slippers are inspected before each use. Her food tasted twice. Conversations shortened, smiles longer than they need to be. She's being prepared, though no one says for what. And here's your historical fact. Mughal princesses, unlike European counterparts, often didn't marry. They remained powerful figures within court politics, advisors, landowners, architects, guardians of younger heirs. But this power came with a price. A life lived mostly indoors, behind screens, half seen, half heard, too important to release, too dangerous to fully trust. You feel it now, the court watching her. Through their silence, even the birds seem to sing more cautiously near her window. She's called before her father, the emperor, for the first time in weeks. The summons is written in his own hand. That's rare. You can almost hear the ink drying unevenly, his script, slower now, more fragile. He's old, and everyone knows it. In the hall of private audience, she kneels on a silk carpet that once belonged to her grandmother, Queen, who, rumor has it, knew 30 ways to end a rebellion using only rumors and betel leaves. The emperor doesn't look at her directly. He watches his reflection in the polished arms of a bronze chair. He speaks gently, like someone wrapping thorns in velvet. He says, "The world beyond the walls is not kind to those who live too vividly." She nods. He tells her she will be relocated for tranquility. A different wing. A quieter place. Fewer eyes. Fewer expectations. She doesn't argue, but in her chest, something folds. That night, she leaves behind her favorite cushion and the last letter from her late mother. She takes only her parrot, the mirror shard, and a scrap of parchment tucked into her sleeve, a note she wrote to herself years ago, back when the garden still spoke her name. As she's led down a passage she's never walked, the walls begin to change. No more inlays of flowers or birds. No fountains. Just plain, veined marble, cool and severe, as if shaped by a hand that had long forgotten beauty. Her new chamber waits at the end of a narrow corridor. No windows, no ceiling, opening, just 4 walls, a bronze door that closes soundlessly, and a ventilation grill, small enough for breath but not sound. The moment she steps inside, she understands it's not exile, it's erasure. There are no guards posted, no locks to see, but you feel it, the kind of silence that isn't accidental. It's been practiced, honed, made useful. They say Mughal architects built rooms where whispers could be heard across 20 feet, but also chambers where the loudest scream would vanish like perfume in fire. She lays her hand on the marble wall. It doesn't echo. Here's your fringe detail. A 17th century traveler recorded seeing a section of palace sealed off with no door, only the faint outline of one. Inside, he claimed, faint traces of coal and crushed rose petals lingered on the floor. No records explained what the chamber was for. No one ever tried to open it. Back in the present, your princess arranges her few possessions carefully. The mirror shard on the floor, angled just so to catch any sliver of light. The parrot in its covered cage. The letter from her younger brother, the one who cried when she left. And then, she waits. Days pass, marked only by meals slid silently through. A slot, time thickens, stretches, forgets to move. Sometimes she sinks just to see if the walls still remember melody. One evening, she finds a mark in the marble dot, not a crack. A carving, small, faint, not decorative. A single letter from an old Persian script. SH, the beginning of a name. Maybe hers, maybe the other girl's, maybe both. She presses her forehead against it, and for the first time in weeks, the parrot speaks again. She's still listening. The room feels smaller now, or maybe more full. You look at the walls again. Their veins move slightly, like something breathing just beneath. Your princess doesn't sleep that night, but she does dream, in the dream. She's standing outside her chamber, looking in, and her reflection is the one that doesn't blink. She remembers your name. That's the thing no one warns you about when they seal you into a chamber like this. Reality doesn't restart properly. It lingers, like steam from a bath that's already gone cold. Your princess lies still in her bed of linen and jasmine-scented air, staring at the ceiling that isn't quite blank. The marble above her has changed, not in color, not in shape, but in presence. She could swear the veins in the stone have shifted slightly in the night, like script reorganizing itself. Like someone correcting a name, she blinks once. The sound of her own breath echoes oddly just for a moment, then disappears again. You sit with her through the long, slow silence that follows. Morning, as it exists here, is measured by the faint warmth that seeps in from somewhere. No light, just a soft temperature shift. Her food arrives, a bowl of dal, slightly overcooked. She doesn't touch it, not because she's afraid, because she's trying to listen. Something's tapping again. Not footsteps this time. Not quite. More like the soft rhythm of fingers brushing silk. A ghost of a pattern, repeating every few hours, always from the same wall. Always too quiet to be an accident. She moves toward it, cautious but unafraid. Presses her ear flat against the marble dot, and this time, she hears it clearly. A song hummed, not sung. Without words, not sad, not happy. Just old. So old that it feels like it's been echoing through the palace since before walls even existed. She backs away slowly, sits cross-legged on the floor, and speaks for the first time in 3 days. You're not a ghost. You're a memory that wasn't allowed to finish. Here's your historical detail. The Mughal court, especially during the later reigns, became increasingly paranoid. Daughters were assets, but also liabilities, especially those connected to factions or accused of harboring ambitions. Several were relocated or disappeared under the guise of health retreats, religious seclusion, or divine callings. Few were ever seen again. And now, for the strange tidbit, in 1907, a colonial mapmaker sketched out the full floor plan of a ruined Mughal palace in Agra. One wing was noted with a red X, and the label sealed by Imperial Order No Access. The hallway leading to it was perfectly intact. The records offered no explanation. When asked about it later, the cartographer simply said, "It felt like someone was behind the walls, holding their breath." Back in the chamber, your princess has begun carving, not word symbols, with a tiny hairpin she's kept hidden in her braid for years. Her fingertips are raw, but she doesn't stop. She carves a series of shapes just above the floor. Crescents, stars, tiny birds with half-folded wings. She's not trying to escape, she's trying to mark time. After all, if memory is forbidden from existing in writing, maybe it can exist in pattern. The parrot watches her, head tilted. It hasn't spoken since the last rain. Until now, it whispers, "She's doing it again." The princess freezes. Who, she asks, but the parrot simply turns away and begins grooming its wing. That night, when sleep comes finally, it brings a new dream. She's not inside the chamber. She's beneath it. In tunnels she's never seen before. Stone corridors, lit by lanterns that float without chains. On the walls, mosaics made of pearl and ash. And in the center of it all, a throne that looks like it was never meant to be. Sat on jagged, cracked, covered in faint smudges of coal. A woman stands beside it, veiled in marble dust, lips moving but soundless. The princess steps closer, and finally reads the name etched across the throne's base. It's her own, but written backward. She wakes with a start. The chamber feels thinner. Like the walls aren't holding her in anymore. They're holding something else out. There's a moment only, a moment where she sees her reflection in the mirror shard flicker. Two faces overlapping. The same eyes, one tearful, one wide awake. And then she hears the sound again, not tapping, not silk this time, it's breathing, right behind the marble.